Hey guys! So today's video is going to be another character doll, or as I prefer calling it, a portrait doll, because these are based on real actors as opposed to an animated character. So today we'll be making Maleficent. I am going to be kind of rambling throughout this video because the sculpting itself, just the face, is about 9 minutes I think. I didn't include much of the sculpting of the body because I do show that in other videos and I'm going to be referring to those. But instead of having just the music in the background, I thought I'd do some more talking just to make it more interesting, I guess. So as with all my other character dolls, I always start off by finding a bunch of pictures and putting them in some type of collage in Photoshop, just so that I have something to look at while sculpting. And for something like this, which is based off a real person, I definitely use a lot more pictures than when making an animated character such as Pocahontas. So for this one I decided to put a picture of the collage on my blog, and I'm going to put that link in the info box. I won't be doing that with all my character or portrait dolls, but it's just to give you guys an idea of what I'm looking at while sculpting. I started off by mixing a pale skin tone and then placing some clay on my sculpting base. If you have any questions for any of the tools or materials I'm using, please refer to the 2 basics videos I made, and I'm going to be linking those in the info box as well. I then use kind of a pointy dotting tool, a needle tool, to just mark off where the different features are going to be placed, and then use my ball tools and dotting tools to start giving the face some shape. I've always seen sculpting a portrait or character doll much like drawing a portrait, because even though you're using different tools and materials, you're still doing the same thing. You're copying what you see, you're copying shapes, textures and colors, and what I'm doing with the clay is very similar. I'm drawing a portrait, the only difference is that I have to make it 3-dimensional. And so that one thing I'm not really able to show you in the tutorial is that while sculpting I'm always turning the head to make sure that what I've made that looks good from the front view matches up with the pictures of the character or person from the side view. Now there are definitely lots of different ways you can go about sculpting a portrait doll like this. I think I've made 6 portrait dolls in total, and all of those were made back in 2011 and 2012. But what I did back then is I would kind of work all over the face at once, so I wouldn't focus on just one feature, whereas for this one I kind of started out focusing on the eyes, then moved on to the nose, and then the mouth. I do definitely think that I prefer this method over working on the entire face at once when making a detailed character, just because your mind isn't all over the place and you can focus on just that one feature. And I know this is going to be a question: how long does it take you to sculpt something like this? I never time how long it takes me to make something, I just enjoy the process. If you start worrying about whether something takes you 1 hour, 2 hours, 5 hours or a couple of days, it just kind of takes the fun out of it. And when working on these kind of larger projects, I'm not necessarily doing it all in one sitting. For these portrait dolls, I prefer just making a little at a time and then working on other projects on the side. I'm also watching YouTube videos while working, which slows me down a lot, and then of course recording the tutorial also slows down the process. So it's really difficult for me to estimate how long it takes me to make these dolls. For the character dolls, I'll usually set aside 2 days and then maybe 3 days if I have to go get some specific fabric or something. But I'll set aside 1 day for the sculpting and then 1 day for the decorating. And then for these portrait dolls, because I'm only doing a little at a time, I'll probably set aside about a week. While working on other projects, of course. I first focused on sculpting just Angelina Jolie's face, because although Maleficent looks a bit different, it's still Angelina's face. The only difference is the cheekbones and the small bump of the nose, which they added with prosthetics. Another thing I want to mention is that a lot of you have been requesting different characters, actors, singers, etc. So dolls based on real people, and because these take me longer to make, I won't be making as many. And so if you're requesting these people as opposed to the animated characters, there might be less of a chance that I'm actually gonna be making them. Also because I don't really want to spend a lot of time working on a person I don't like. And without trying to offend anyone, Justin Bieber, members from One Direction, etc. are people that I'm probably never gonna be doing dolls of, just because I don't particularly care for those people. But if you do want to request dolls based off people, characters from movies are a much safer bet than requesting a singer. Although at some point I would really like to make a Michael Jackson doll. A tip when sculpting these portrait dolls is try to sculpt with your eyes and not your mind. The reason why I say that is because if you're sculpting, in this case Angelina Jolie, the first thing that might come to your mind is big lips. But if your mind focuses on just those big lips, you might end up making them a lot bigger than what they actually are. So make sure to really look at the pictures of her to make it look realistic. Another video I'm going to be linking in the info box is my how to sketch for a portrait, because a lot of the things that goes through my mind when drawing portraits are the same things that go through my mind when sculpting. So if you haven't seen that video, I would definitely recommend you to check it out. Another thing I did was, because I wanted to make room for making the head poseable, I kind of made her skull a bit lower or smaller than it actually is supposed to be. And I then made another piece from some scrap clay that I'm going to be gluing on later. It's hopefully going to make a lot more sense once you see it. Before pre-baking the face, I added strips of black clay around it to frame the face the same way the hat or the scarf would, and this is just going to help you visualize the character. And also before pre-baking, I removed some of the clay from where the neck is going to sit, and after pre-baking I added clay to the back of the head and made the horns from scrap clay. I am going to be leaving out steps for these more detailed dolls just because I've already gone through it in other videos. After baking, I used colored pencils for the details. I did talk about these in my basics video I posted a couple of days ago, but I just wanted something that was more versatile, something I could use for fine details but also use for softer shadows. And the ones I'm using are watercolor pencils. I chose to use these because it's the best type of pencil I have, but colored pencils also tend to give a very waxy, shiny look, and that's not really what you want. But for these, once you add a matte glaze on top, It will help smear the colored pencil and make it look less waxy. This is also why you have to be really careful when sealing with a glaze, because you might end up smearing all the hard work you just put into it. And once I was happy with the details, I sealed the face with a matte glaze, followed by kind of a thick coat of my Renaissance wax. And for the horns, I used black acrylic paint just to give them a base color. Bear in mind that at this point she is missing the top of her head as well as her scarf and kind of headdress or headpiece, so she is going to be looking kind of strange. I then used my X-Acto knife to carve out some of the clay where the wire goes, just like in my Jack Skellington tutorial, and I then glued on the rest of the head before making the headpiece. For the headpiece, I used 3 different types of fabric. I used one that had some shimmer for the front, then some faux leather for the sides, and then some wrinkly fabric that I'm going to be using for the dress for the rest of it. I also added a strip of the faux leather around the neck. If you haven't seen my other doll tutorials, I would recommend checking out my Pocahontas tutorial, because that one goes through sculpting the entire body, and then maybe my Corpse Bride tutorial for the shoes. The hands were both made the same way as in my Pocahontas tutorial, but for the one holding the staff, I decided to sculpt it around a knitting needle. To make the dress, I first folded a piece of fabric on the middle and then made a basic dress shape around the doll, then glued that in place. For the sleeves, I did the same thing, folded a piece of fabric on the middle and then cut out half a circle. After gluing those in place, I added glue near the shoulders to create some folds, and added glue at the wrist and elbow joint so the dress would sit nicely. And to make a super quick stuff, I just took a wooden dowel and removed some of the wood with an X-Acto knife to make it look more rough, then glued on an emerald, but you can use any type of bead or some polymer clay, and then glued on embroidery floss and painted it with brown acrylic paint. Really hope you like it, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in my next tutorial.